What's up, YouTube? This is the Dark Side of Life here, and it is now time for our weekly video. Today, I wanted to talk about depression. The reason I want to talk about depression is that this is a very common disorder that people can go through. Sometimes it's just due to a situation in life. Sometimes you can have clinical depression where it's much harder. So let's talk about one, depression, and then we're going to talk about clinical depression at the end. So depression can honestly occur anytime something bad has just happened in your life. Depression should not be confused with sadness. Depression and sadness are not the same thing, and this is a common, I think, misunderstanding, is that depression and sadness are the same. Depression and sadness are not the same. They're both very different. So today we're going to talk about depression that you can get temporarily. Now, when you have depression, it's not, again, so much a feeling of sadness, but a feeling of emptiness. You feel empty inside. You have no drive to do anything. You don't want to do anything. You just want to lay in bed all day. Now, this is a very common form of depression, and I think this is the depression that most people might feel once in their life. This depression in of itself is not dangerous and usually comes after maybe a heartbreak or, losing somebody close to you. It is temporary, and usually during this stage you do not have any types of thoughts of self-harm. This depression is normal. Everyone deals with it. The best way to honestly get across depression is to push yourself forward as much as possible. The longer you stay in depression, the more it gets a hold of you. A good example of depression would be the never-ending story when they go to the swamp of sorrow. That is very significant of depression. In fact, the picture I use, this is very significant of depression. This is what depression does. It slowly pulls you in and drowns you. Now again, luckily, the typical form of depression that most people get is overcomable. Sadly, however, a lot of the people that get this depression seem to think that they are then actually clinically depressed, not understanding the difference between the two. So let's talk about clinical depression. This is the serious one. Now, normal typical depression is going to occur due to an occurrence in your life, the loss of a loved one, where immense sadness just builds up to a point where it becomes depression. Again, depression is not sadness. It can be caused by sadness, but it's not sadness itself. It is actually when a lot of sadness hits you and you get depressed from it. Usually, again, a tragic event, losing a loved one, a breakup, something of that sort. Now, this type of depression can sometimes evolve into clinical depression, especially if you're losing like a child or something, and you can't heal from it. But again, that is when it would become clinical depression, which we're going to talk about now. Clinical depression is a form of depression where, if you've ever felt depressed, imagine it a million times worse, and there is no escape. Once you are clinically depressed, trying to escape out of this clinical depression, and I may be honestly if the term's wrong, for me, clinical depression is when you actually suffer from a disorder of depression where it comes randomly. I do suffer from depression. There are times when, for no reason at all, I just get depressed. I don't want to do anything. I mean, my pastime is playing games, and if I'm really depressed, I won't want to play games. I won't want to do anything. I just want to sit and do nothing. Now, the problem with this depression is that this depression is not actually able to really be gotten over. It hits, and it takes a lot more work to get over it. And this is the depression which usually leads to suicide. Now, something to be clear about. This depression does not lead to suicide because it makes you sad. This depression leads to suicide because you don't feel anything. When you're sad, believe it or not, when you're sad, you still feel a form of self-worth. When you are depressed, you feel your entire worth is gone. You feel nothing, you feel worth nothing, you just feel empty, you feel like a shell. This is why suicide is then at that point something that can be seriously thought about. Typical depression, you're going to just feel empty and just have no drive. We get the clinical depression, the intense depression. The depression usually comes from mental illnesses, or that are side effects of mental illnesses, or can be side effects of medication, or it can honestly occur if you have decided to sit in your traditional depression long enough for it to evolve into this form of depression. Now, one thing about this depression, and this is very important, is a lot of people now, from what I'm watching on YouTube and for the last 6 months, prior year, have decided that for some reason having a disorder is good and don't understand what actually comes with the disorders. They don't understand, and you can kind of see that they don't understand because of the fact of the way they react. Case in point. Somebody with depression is not going to sit there and be like, I have depression. I'm depressed right now, blah, blah, blah. They're not going to do that. The reason why is when you have depression, intense diagnosed depression, you don't want to do that. You don't want to talk. You don't want to share that feeling. I'm going to be perfectly honest. If you guys are watching people online that are sharing how they have this, and not to share, but like recording their disorders, I'm going to be honest, it's most likely going to be BS. The reason why is anybody with a disorder is not going to want to display it. I will be honest, I would not want to do, I will talk about my history, I will talk about my disorder, but the last thing I'm going to do is even record my face. I don't want my face to be seen. Because the fact is, there's still a very negative stigma with disorders where people might think that if you have a specific disorder, such as borderline personality disorder like I do, that you're going to be a psychopath or a sociopath. And while it is true, I do have sociopathic tendencies, not psychopathic, but sociopathic, where I can be a little more careless, or not careless, I can care less about other people, and I don't have as deep of a feeling as people might think. Somebody dies, I don't feel anything. Death is death. For me, there's no feeling. I mean, I feel bad for the person dealing with it, right? When my father-in-law passed away, I mean, I love my father-in-law. He was a great guy, but I didn't feel anything when he died. There's a lack of an emotional connection there. Now, this does not mean that my children have the same lack of connection. I mean, obviously, I have a much stronger, my connection with my children is intense. But my children are probably the only two people in this world that I would probably be upset about if that happened. Nobody else can I build that connection with. And that's because my children are a part of me, And so that's kind of a different situation there. For this reason, I'm going to be honest, I could never understand personally why people who have why people commit suicide when they have a family that cares for them and a family that needs them. I don't fully understand that personally, but I'm not the omnipotent or omniscient being of mental illnesses. So again, everything I say here is under my own experience. It may not always be correct, it may not be the same for you. But one thing I will say is if somebody is videotaping themselves saying, I'm depressed, they are most likely lying. The way you can see this is number one, I have depression, but I'm not depressed right now. I'm not saying I'm depressed right now. I have cases of depression where it gets pretty rough and I have to try to be positive, but I'm not making this recording while I'm depressed, nor am I sitting here going, I'm depressed. I am being honest with my feelings at this moment in time is I feel fine. And this is the reality of how people this is the reality of how people feel. If somebody records themselves saying they are depressed, it's again usually not true because of the way they do it. If somebody's online saying, I have depression, I want to share with you what it is like to educate you, that's fine. And this is one thing you will see about these people posting these disorders, which I'll make another video of later, is that they don't want to educate people. So if you're wondering why I'm doing this to educate people and more to reach out to people who maybe suffer from these disorders or suffer from something and they just don't know what to do. Because to be honest, the hardest part of having a disorder is feeling alone. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to share it. So when you have it, you feel ostracized. You feel alone. Who do you talk to? As someone who suffered from borderline personality disorder, not bipolar, borderline personality disorder, and as well as the fact that I still suffer from it, I have never met another person in person that I could talk to about this disease, about this disorder. I don't want to say disease, I say disorder. And that's because it's just nobody wants to talk about it, especially personality disorders, because parts of borderline personality disorder are narcissism, antisocial behavior, and other things, right? And these are also the makings of a sociopath. Sociopaths are usually antisocial, have some form of narcissism, and suffer from other forms of that are come from borderline personality disorder. Psychopaths usually have it, but at a much higher degree, and I believe like the difference between psychopath and sociopath is the environment. But I would say that I have sociopathic tendencies because I do have empathy, right? Like, I do have a conscience, right? I mean, there are certain things that I watch that I don't know how anyone could do because I do have a conscience, right? But then there are other things that I could personally do that people would wonder how I could do that. And it's because in that situation, I just don't have a conscience about it. I lack empathy for that, right? And so it's hard to find people that feel that way because it's a very dangerous thing to put out. And I am very honest with it in my life. I let people know, I talk about it, because for me, I think talking is the healthiest form of medicine. When you talk about it, you don't let it dive into you. And this is going to come back to depression. How do you suffer from depression? How do you get over depression? Sorry, how do you get over depression? This is the most important part. If you are currently going through depression, you're going to have to, this is hard, pick yourself up and you have to talk to people about it. Depression is it's like a swamp. You're sinking. And the only way you're going to get out is if you reach out and have somebody pull you out. But nobody's going to know you're sinking if you don't yell out for them. And obviously this is figuratively, because you're not going to literally want to yell for somebody. But reaching out to somebody and talking to them helps you to see your life differently. One of the best things I do when I get depressed is I talk to my friends or I talk to people I trust. And I talk about these things, and I talk to people I know I can talk about it and be open with. And, you know, that's one thing I've learned in my life is because of me doing that, I've also been a person that many people just naturally gravitate to talk about their problems. You would be surprised how many people just naturally gravitate to me and talk about their problems with me and don't even realize that so many people do that. This is kind of another reason why I decided to start making these videos is since so many people have already come to me in my life, I would like to make a system for people to come to it. Now, again, depression is hard, but one thing, if you have depression, you have to remember, depression will destroy your self-worth. Depression will make you feel useless. And the longer you're in it, the more it sucks you out, and the harder it is to get out of it. This is a lesson that is hard to learn, and to be honest, it's going to take you learning the hard way the first time, pulling yourself out, and then you would finally be able to know how to handle it the next time it comes. Again, my advice to anyone going through depression, or if you know somebody going through depression, especially if they are regularly going through depression. And again, depression is not sadness, it's emptiness, right? And if you just see someone that's just empty, right, and you can kind of see it, you need to take the effort to talk to them. You need to push them to talk. Honestly, I think one of the biggest things that people don't want to do, but it's one of the best things you can do, is push people to talk. If you know somebody who suffers from depression or any form of disability or is at risk of suicide, what you need to do is you need to get them to talk. Because what's happening is those feelings, that negativity is getting deeper and deeper and deeper, and it's just cooking and growing. And feelings are like a seed, and they grow. And of course you want, like if you're planting a garden, think of your body like a garden, right? You want to plant flowers, you want things that are when you look at, you're going to be happy to see. You don't want to see weeds, right? Depression and these other feelings of darkness and just that aren't good feelings are like weeds, right? And the difference between weeds and a flower is that weeds spread quickly. When weeds start to grow in your garden, they spread, and it's a lot of work to get rid of them. And it's a lot of work to keep the flowers growing. Our bodies are the same way. It's a lot of work to grow the flowers, especially harder when you've got weeds trying to take over the place. And the only way you're going to get rid of those weeds is for somebody to talk to help you pull them out and get rid of them. Because once those weeds get too much, your self-worth is gone. And the next thing you know, you did something that you never thought you would do, that no one thought you would do. And then it's too late. This is kind of another way to spot somebody who is truly suicidal versus somebody who is not suicidal. And again, depression leads to suicide. This is why. Before you can become suicidal, you have to lose self-worth. Your life has to become meaningless. You have to have felt like you failed so badly, or that nobody cares about you. It's a true feeling of just emptiness, and that comes from depression. And depression, again, it grows, it eats you alive, and it destroys your worth. And when you finally have no self-worth and you feel like your life is worth nothing, that's when you are able to make that decision and don't even realize just how important you are to people. And this is something as well to remember. It's not enough to tell somebody they're important, right? Because many people think that if they just say, oh, if I just told them how important they were, it would have helped them. No. What helps is to get them to talk. You don't need to talk. They need to talk. And this is one thing to remember. When you're with some depression, you need to get them to talk. And they're not going to want to talk, right? They're going to hide it. They're going to close it. But you need to sit there and say, no, something is wrong. Let's talk. I'm here. I'm listening. And eventually you need to break them down to talk. One of the biggest issues, I think, is that people tend to be a little too nervous to get involved, afraid that maybe, just maybe, they'll push the person over the edge, and in the end, they didn't get involved enough. One of the best things in my life that happened to me was when somebody finally put down the gloves and told me, don't do that, pretty much to my face, that if I ever do that shit again, leave the house, because they don't want to come home and see it. They don't want to come home and see my dead body. And you know what? This person had earned my respect before they said this to me, of course. They'd taken care of me. They gave me home. That was the last time I ever cut. And to this day, it's the only thing that stopped me from actually continuing that behavior is the fact that I had somebody who didn't sit there and was scared, but said it straight to me. Don't do that shit. Now again, you have to have somebody who is obviously somebody that has earned you've earned their respect. If you're going to do that, they have to know you care about them, and they have to know that their best interest is what's at your heart. The worst thing you can do is baby them. Like, babying them is a really bad idea. Never baby somebody. If you baby this behavior, believe it or not, it actually feeds it. And that's one of the issues for me, is that when I attempted suicide twice, it got babied. And because it was babied, well, yep, you can imagine how that one went. And I just went that far. With that said, I'm going to end the video here with the last message. While depression may come and go, it doesn't last forever. And one of my favorite songs to listen to during depression is by POD, It Doesn't Rain Anymore, I think that's the title, which I think is a great example of depression, how depression works. But more importantly, about how it's not going to last forever, and eventually there's going to be a sunny day again. So if you're suffering from depression, just hold on and think positively. You will eventually get out of it. But if you let it take over you, take over your mind, take over your heart, take over your body, your chance of getting out of that is not going to be very high. Not without something horribly happening first, which is going to wake you up out of it, or without being put into some form of hospital to help you get better. I would suggest if you're suffering with depression, please go and talk to somebody. Talk to somebody close. Let people know. That is how you get better. Anyways, I'm going to end it here. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.